My story was I did not grow up wanting to be a CPA. How shocking is that? I originally wanted to play football, American football. That was never going to happen. Then I joined the Air Force ROTC, wanted to fly jets like my older brother. But as it turned out, I was afraid to fly. So that career path crashed and burned. We want to show our investors we're rich and we make a lot of money. Give us more of your money, buy our stock. But then we want to show the government, no, we're poor. We don't have any profit. Don't take any of our money because we are not making much. So I love those discussions. And
I think that is the biggest challenge with these degrees, not just the technical skills, but the resilience to go through, one paper at a time, every day to, work for that particular time, that consistency, which is very important.
The good news is if you aspire to sit on somebody's board or to have a C-suite position, there's a lot of challenges that you face on a daily basis, right? Yeah, we're just looking at the incremental cost. If we take out of the equation the university cost and just look at the cost of investing the time and money to getting the CPA, it is a very quick turnaround. And then the opportunity beyond that, as Shabir said, when you look at 20 to 40%, that's not a one-time differential. I mean, that's a differential each and every year for the rest of your career. So when you look at it in those terms, the IRR is well above that cost of capital.
Hi everyone, my name is Shradha Ghosh and I'm the founder of Pixalearn. Today, before we start the session, I would definitely thank Shabir for organizing this for us. And thank you so much, Pete. I don't know if you've ever heard about me, but to introduce you, I think I would just want to take you through the journey that I went through when I signed up for this course, which was, I think, 15 years back. That was a time when we were not having centers in India, and I had to flow down to California to write my papers. And I remember it was the usual thing that we had to, and that was a time when we were not allowed, we were not having the recorded lectures that we could just open and log in. We had to go to a center, there we had to listen to one lecture, and I remember me and my husband, we were both writing the papers together. 15 years down the line, what we remember from all of those sessions, apart from the technical training, is probably a lot of those mentorship tips that you kept giving. And now, last 12, 13 years, when I'm in this discipline and I have been mentoring students, I realize how difficult it is, especially if you've never had a live session, still resonating, talking about, that motivation to pull through, especially you're back from office for a long time and then you sit. So I still remember who's better than us? Nobody. I still remember you would say that, you have to study when students are taking break, your friends are going for a disco party and you would have to sit and you would have to slog because at some point of time you're going to own your Porsche and it will all be worth it. And,
Did you buy the Porsche?
No, we couldn't, okay? No, we couldn't. But the point is that...
Shradha, you weren't listening to Pete well enough then,
No, but what I'm saying is it's very difficult to mentor, connect with people, and I'm sure there are so many people throughout the world who would manifest that one day we'll complete CPA and then we'll write that LinkedIn post that we are ready for that cup of coffee. That isn't easy. So hats off to you for being there. And it's very difficult, right? You're not talking to us, you're not coming live, no interaction yet. We could, 15 years down the line, we could hear you in our minds when we are talking about CPA. So hi everyone, it's a great pleasure to introduce Peter Olinto to you. I think he's one of the most relatable CPA mentor whose voice echoes when you're thinking of completing CPA. Whether you've crossed paths with him or not is irrelevant. It's impossible to think about CPA and not think about him. So thank you so much for joining us today. And guys, we have Shabir here with us. He's from UWorld, and I think he is the guy who's responsible for bringing and making this happen to us. So thank you so much, Shabir. So Pete, we start with you, and then probably we'll go through a set of questions that we have so that we can talk about why CPA is still relevant in today's world. So when we're thinking about AI and we're thinking about so many changes happening, what is the power of these three letters to change life, CPA? Thank you so much. Yes, Pete.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Shabir, good to see you again. Wow, what an introduction. So I am so happy things worked out for you and your husband. Congratulations on all of your success. It looks like your time and effort that you put in preparing has paid you back. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to hear that. And I guess for all the guests on today, it really is life altering. You know, if you do your due diligence and you see the opportunities that these three letters will provide, and it's beyond just public accounting, right? So if you were to go, the corporate route at some point, or obviously anywhere around the world, the government in the U.S. federal or the state or the local level, they're probably the third largest employer of CPAs in the US, and I'm sure that's the case around the world as well. But yeah, it's just, as a young professional, my story was I did not grow up wanting to be a CPA. How shocking is that? I originally wanted to play football, American football. That was never going to happen. Then I joined the Air Force ROTC, wanted to fly jets like my older brother. But as it turned out, I was afraid to fly. So that career path crashed and burned. But I had an uncle who was a partner. And way back when it was the Big Eight, wasn't the Big Four. But my uncle explained to me, if you think of a young professional that has to make a choice, a life-altering choice at 18 to 22 years old as to what path they want the rest of their lives, it's very overwhelming. He said, well, in accounting, especially public accounting, you get the opportunity, on the audit side, when you think about all the different industry areas, that you would have an opportunity to audit companies. You would need industry training. So, if you think pharmaceutical, IT, oil and gas, retail, manufacturing, etc., they all have their own nuances. So you get an opportunity to sample all these different things, and eventually you might find your niche and say, yeah, I'm really passionate about that. If audit's not your thing, obviously, tax, there's individual, corporate, partnership, gift, the state, trust, state and local, international. But then there's also a lot of planning involved, right? It's not just about compliance. It's about offering your clients advice as to how to lawfully avoid unnecessary taxes. And, hand in hand with the tax comes wealth management. Because if you want to do any kind of estate planning or portfolio management, you really have to have a good understanding of tax. And then with all that experience you get between audit, tax, whatever you decide, you build up the skill set that you can offer a lot in a role as a consultant or as an advisor. And in the US in particular, like if somebody were to take a job, let's say with an IBM, and internally try to work their way up to a controller or a CFO, generally that path is going to take far longer than somebody who starts in public accounting and has the opportunity to work with different companies in that industry. They're oftentimes going to be eligible for that same type of role in a much shorter period of time because it's just that well respected. But to just one other point I just want to make right up front, though, I was told long ago that you've got to look at the CPA exam, like in the U.S., like lawyers, law students look at the bar exam. It's unheard of to invest all that time and money to go to law school and then not pass the bar exam. Like you can't practice law. Like, why would you do that? It's kind of unfortunate in a way. Obviously, you don't need legally to practice as an accountant. You don't need to be a certified public accountant. But the fact is, to spend all that time and effort and money to get a degree in accounting and then not be a CPA really makes little sense because, it's true in the US and I know in many countries around the world where if you're not certified, the public accounting firm can't promote you to manager or won't promote you to manager. So that puts a ceiling on your opportunity within the firm you're in. And then, so many people leave public accounting not because they're asked to leave, because you're so heavily recruited, because that skill set, that analytical set, that's why AI, I tell people, like a lot of the accumulating data and data entry and what have you, we used to have interns do that, right? So now, they don't need a professional to do that. AI can do a lot of that for us, but the analytics behind it, using that professional judgment, having that basis of comparison of different companies and different industries, it's still a very valuable skill set So if you should decide to leave public accounting, which a lot of people do, you are heavily recruited. But if you don't finish the job and you're not a CPA, you're not going to have nearly as many job opportunities as you would otherwise, and certainly not for the same amount of money. So what I tell people, step one is always motivation. Like, why am I going to make this investment in time and money? And when you do your due diligence and you see the opportunities that are presented to you, it motivates you, right? So we joked, earlier, but I tell all my students, like, whether you're studying for any high stakes exam. So I've been through the U.S. bar exam, obviously the CPA. I'm a CFA charter holder. Step one is like, why would I invest my time? What opportunities is this going to provide me? And when you see that firsthand, what those financial opportunities are and career opportunities are, you will then be motivated. The vast majority of people, that's what lights that fire to say, I need to get this done. So with that, yeah, there's no doubt everyone on this call, you're spending your hard-earned time and money. Make sure you understand what opportunities are out there for you, because they are abundant.
And Shradha, just to add what Pete's saying, it's very clearly there's a hiring preference in India for people with CPAs. There's demand for people, with CPAs. So that carries weight to those three letters. And the earning potential is higher. Typically in India, CPAs and MNCs command 25 to 40% higher salaries than non-certified peers. So, that's why, we're doing it for the body of knowledge, but we're doing it for career progression, for higher income as well. So, these are just reasons.
And I agree. And I also think, after COVID, a lot, like, it's very difficult to now remain local. You will have to have some kind of an international credential, because extremely localized version of any company is now very difficult, especially after COVID, when the world has opened up. And we are seeing this with so many of our students now, much more. Like 15 years back, when we sat for this exam, not many had heard about this degree, but now it has become like a mainstream degree, and it is giving you a huge financial up, in the market. So yeah, I totally agree that yes, it is a very good career option right now, because it makes you eligible for any kind of an international posting. Even in India, if you're having companies that you're working with who has some kind of an interaction with the US, it really makes sense to have an international degree. So yeah,
it's not just the international posting, but also if you want to do remote
Yeah.
working from India. So that's going to be very credible for you to have the CPA qualification.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I would also share some of the stories as we are going through about what is the change that this degree has brought in to some of our candidates who had just cleared CPA. Question for you, Pete. See, we, when at Pixalearn, we generally talk about, the feeling that concept once understood is common sense, and the entire teaching is carried with that dictum in our mind. So when you're doing something like a CPA, how do you think that the curriculum is trying to change the mindset of the students from just memorizing rules to a strategic business thinking, which is definitely what is required to elevate your earning potential and also your capability? How do you think that's happening?
So this is why they had the evolution just a few years back, because there were, in my opinion, rightful criticisms that the exam was too academic in nature, that if somebody had experience in audit, let's say 3 or 4 years work experience, you would think, wow, they must have such an advantage on the exam. And ironically, in many cases, they were disadvantaged because the practitioner type experience wasn't reflected on the exam. So the AICPA listened to the practitioners, and they reduced the number of multiple choice that tends to test more of the remembering and understanding. And then they made the exam 50% what they call task-based simulations, which is really supposed to simulate what a first or second year associate would be doing if they had an audit position or a tax position. So work experience for certain parts of the exam now does in fact benefit you. There's no doubt there's still a lot of concepts that are academic in nature. That's why the order in which you sit for the parts is very important, because while the academic information is relatively fresh in your mind, you generally want to try to get those parts of the exam out of the way on the front side. But there's no doubt if you're going to be doing audit for a living, the work experience and new hire training you get will help you on the audit section of the exam. And if you're a tax professional, certainly all the experience you get working with the forms 1040, 1065, etc., that's going to help you on not only the reg section, but the TCP, tax compliance and planning. So I do think now they are rewarding for the first time that valuable work experience. And that also, I look at it a lot like, the example I'll give, I'm teaching a Tuesday night class, a free lecture in ratio analysis, financial statement analysis. But, if you can calculate the current ratio, what does that really prove, right? AI can do that for us, right? The current assets divided by the current liabilities. But when you look at the trend for the target company, you're going to do, a time series analysis. Is there, what's happening to their ratio? Why is it changing? Why is it changing? And what does everybody else in the industry look like? And so you can compare the target company to itself over the time, or you can look at the target company relative to the peers. That's where the real value is, and that type of analytical capabilities and using your skills to say, hey, I see, something, going on with this company. I think that we should raise a red flag. They might be in greater risk of financial distress or not. There are things sometimes, the numbers, AI sometimes, it hallucinates because sometimes numbers could be misleading. So the example I love to give is, again, using the current ratio. You see a company's current ratio growing. The spread between current assets and liabilities keeps going up. Wow, look at all the current assets they have available to service that debt as it becomes due. But then we find out the company can't sell its inventory. They've lost customers. They've lost demand. So the reason the numerator is growing is because they can't liquidate their inventory. And so if they can't sell their inventory, how are they going to generate cash to service that debt, right? So I like the skills today that the exam is testing beyond the mere memorization of a formula, and I think also it's important for people to understand that type of skill set and that type of judgment and where you can take your experience working with different companies and different things you've seen over time, that carries a lot of value in the marketplace. And when the CPA tests those types of skills, it lets potential employers know that, hey, this is somebody that we want to have as a part of our team, because it's not just being robotic like AI and being able to crunch a bunch of numbers. That's why I tell students a properly prepared student, is taking the time to understand and not just merely memorize, because the math intensive formulas, you think, oh, that has to be tested with numbers. Many times it's not. They will give you fact patterns where there are no numbers whatsoever, but they're changing a couple of variables and they want to see, do you understand the implication of changing one particular variable, profit margin, how that's going to affect the company's return on asset, which in turn affects their return on equity, which in turn affects their growth. That's the type of linkage and that's the type of knowledge that really carries value in the workplace and now on the exam as well. So I'm very happy that they've increased the weight in the task-based simulations, because I tell people, even if it were an open book exam, the task-based simulations require you to be able to analyze, if it's a statement of cash flow question, you're going to have an income statement. You're going to have a comparative balance sheet, 2 years worth of balance sheet information. And then a bunch of notes on a bunch of different transactions, issuing stock, buying stock, declaring a dividend, selling property. You've got to be able to first say, oh my gosh, where do I even begin to set this up? That in and of itself is a skill set. And we teach those skills. Like you want to, I call it legalized cheating. You always want to read the requirements first before you delve into the facts or open exhibits, because the requirements are going to tell you right up front what the topic is. And it might tell you immediately, hey, here's the issue. You need to be able to calculate, let's say, pension expense. Well, then I know my formula for pension expense. I write that down so I now can read the facts and open the exhibits in context, already knowing what's relevant. And then I could cherry pick that relevant information and put it in my T account or my formula as I'm reading the facts. Because ironically, what they like to do, and much like in the real world, you're inundated with so much information. Step number one is to decipher what's relevant versus what's irrelevant. So being able to look at the requirements first and see what's going to be asked of you, that's why I call it legalized cheating, before you even read the facts, you already have a good feel for what's going to be relevant versus what's merely distractor information that you can ignore. So I like those skills that they're testing today.
Yeah,
And
yeah, sorry.
another way, Shradha, when you talk about transforming a student's mindset, the new exam version, you're trained to evaluate complex scenarios and apply ethical standards. And that's going to be really important in the future for high-level decision making. So again, it's conditioning the minds of these candidates right now.
Yeah, and see, we see that a lot in our students also because, when people say that we've cleared CPA in 1 year, it's not that we have trained you like from base in 1 year and you're ready. It's all of your work X that has happened and that has made you. That, along with the technical training, helps you to clear the degree. So, a lot of working professionals who have a huge gap, and when they start questioning whether they would be able to do CPA or not, we keep telling them that you have no idea how much relevant information you already have. We just have to bundle it in a theoretical, in theoretical zone, and then you'll be good to go. And actually, all of that practical experience now with the Sims that is being tested brings your entire, learning of so many years and work experience into practical use. So I think that's and also, one question that I keep asking students who've cleared CPA is like, how do you think this degree has changed you? And one answer that keeps coming up is, the modularized approach. The idea that we can understand the ask, break it down to small structured thinking. That approach gets inculcated once you have gone through that process of writing these papers. And more than one, there's so many students who've come up with that thing that, after we've cleared this degree, our thinking level changes. We start approaching things in bits and chunks and taking topics, correlating them, and then taking a decision. So I genuinely feel that mindset changes once you've gone through this entire process, because this is the most alive paper where, your 4 hours of how you're handling yourself and your entire work ex that goes before you sat for the paper, that becomes relevant. So, yeah. One thing that, Peter, we have realized in India is people are, when you go to your undergrad level, people are still doing these degrees, the local degrees. So what I want to know is, a lot of students who call us for deciding whether they want to join CPA or not, they're more concerned about the global passport value of this degree. And so I would want to know from you, like not just from India, but there's so many different nations now which have their own individual standards. And typically for countries and the companies in those countries, people prefer students with those technical degrees. So how do you convince these students that maybe an international degree like a CPA is going to be complementing or supplementing whichever local degrees that they're getting? So for India, we have the Indian CA. So how do you convince them that there is a global passport value to a degree like US CPA?
Well, I think you start with the stock market and you look at all the companies that are being publicly traded that have multinational operations around the world that require a skill set that, quite frankly, US students are really not capable of dealing with a lot of those international issues. So a lot of these US companies that have offices and companies around the world, they're in a difficult position to find candidates that have a global perspective. So, for example, obviously in the US, the focus is so much on US GAAP. But when you have a multinational operation and you're doing business in a foreign country, you have to adhere to that foreign country's rules, right? So a lot of the places around the world that obviously not following US GAAP, they might be following IFRS, or they might be following, Chinese GAAP, whatever it may be.
Yes.
You need people with a skill set that understand the local rules and then are able to help that US company say, okay, we've ultimately got to consolidate these financial statements. We can't have a US company reporting results, number one, in a foreign currency, and nor can we have them reporting results not using US GAAP because it's required, obviously. So you've got to be able to have folks around the world who have a unique skill set in that they understand the local rules and regulations and are able to help that US company translate those financial statements from their local GAAP to US GAAP, and then also translate those financial statements from that foreign currency to the US dollar. Now that's a lot of compliance, and that in and of itself, there's such a crazy demand for. But then a step above that is hedging risk. I mean, if you've got a US company with assets denominated in a foreign currency, and if that foreign currency starts to lose value, I've got receivables denominated in the euro. And if the euro starts to lose value, well, my receivables are losing value. I can't sit idly by and do nothing about that. Well, what position can I take in a derivative that can hedge the risk that if that foreign currency goes down in value, well, if I sell forward contracts on that currency, I can then use the profit on that derivative to offset the loss in the value of my receivables. That's now at a whole nother level beyond just the compliance. That's where you get into the planning to say, hey, when you have these multinational operations, you are faced with a unique set of risks that, quite honestly, the average US candidate is not taught. There's so much time and effort in the US focused solely on the US accounting rules, the US tax rules, the US business law. Well, that's great if the company only does business in the US. But if you look at the Fortune 500 companies and you look at all the companies traded on the S&P, and quite frankly, you know, the vast majority of them, that's not the case. We need that international expertise. And another thing is the culture. Like, to have somebody, you know, a US student try to go abroad, it's difficult to understand the language, the culture. Like, you know, I tell people, like, you know, they're like, oh, well, give me an example. Aren't we all the same? No, we're not, quite honestly. Like, in the US, when you have a lot of debt, you know, the question might be, my gosh, you know, they're borrowing a lot. You know, that could be a risk. But if they don't borrow a lot, oh, that's good. Well, in certain cultures, if you don't have debt on your balance sheet, that raises a red flag. Does somebody else know something we don't know, that they don't think that company's credit worthy? Like, and it's unique to that country, that culture. So when you factor that all in, you take an Indian student who understands the country, understands the culture, understands the currency, understands the local rules and regulations, and then combine that with their understanding of the US GAAP, the US company, what their needs are. You have now put yourself in a position where supply and demand, there's a tremendous demand for that skill set, but the supply is so relatively small. That's why you make the financial dollars that you do, because of simple economics, you know. So for those international candidates in particular, obviously the US companies are doing so much work in India and sending out so much work there. There's tremendous demand. But to have somebody with that skill set, you set yourself apart.
Yes, and I think that's the reason a lot of people who are already working in the finance domain, they kind of gravitate towards CPA, because once you're a working professional, you also have to look at which is a degree which is doable, and probably this is one degree which is aimed at working professionals. So it's easier for people who are already working, have technical knowledge, to gravitate towards an international degree like CPA. So a lot of our students are also from the working professional base, where they have already learned the Indian standards, they have already worked, and now either they want to start their practice from India, or they want to get into those companies which have more international presence, especially in the US. Okay, Pete, you know, we have this podcast that we run that talks about chapters of change, where we kind of talk about the story of individuals and how this degree has changed their life. So we have had students who've told us that they have got promoted to the CFO role in surprisingly less time, maybe in 3-4 months' time. They were already in one profile, and with this degree, they've got promoted as a CFO. We have had students who launched their international practice. So they were practicing as CAs in India, and they launched their offices in the US. Now you have kind of 25 years of work ex, and you have seen probably a lot more such examples, having trained 100,000 students. Can you tell us about any one student or any one story that sticks in your mind where you see this degree kind of changing the entire lifestyle of a person, or maybe changing the entire story of that person? Can you do that for us?
I can. Actually, it's a theme. So there are what sticks out in my mind the most are candidates who, for one reason or another, did not pursue the CPA right out of university, decided to go into the workforce. And then after working a number of years, they found themselves in a position where they hit a ceiling, and that people that they trained under them and people that they knew for a fact they knew as much, if not more, than that underling leapfrog them and then wound up becoming their supervisor, their boss, because that person had those letters that they did not ever get. And so all of a sudden, after 5, 6, 7 years in the workplace, they realize, wow, I don't have those same opportunities, but I have the skill set. There's no doubt I have the skill set, but I never got those letters. So now they become very motivated and say, you know what, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to put that time and effort in to get those letters, and then I'm going to take a big leap forward. And sometimes that's what it takes to motivate people. That, one thing for you to say it or for me to say it or Shabir to say it, but when you experience that firsthand in the workplace, or there's a downsizing at the firm, and somebody with again, great work ethic, great local knowledge, but doesn't have those credentials, and now they're finding it very difficult to find another position that they would enjoy. They realize, wow, I made a mistake, and I need to take a step back, and I can do this. And sometimes it's a matter of, I don't want to use the word really maturity or wisdom. It's more through actual experience in the marketplace and seeing that demand for these credentials that then lights that fire. And somebody who may have thought, wow, I don't think I have the capability, right? I get that all the time. So many people don't think they are smart enough or just can't do it for one reason or another. But then through work experience and meeting different people, you start to realize, well, that person did it and this person did it. Well, why can't I do it too? Right. And then all of a sudden they get the confidence. And another thing I really like, and not to push your course or UWorld and our partnership, but it's a very customized approach today. It's not like it was 10 years ago where, hey, everybody do the same thing. And this is, no, there are topics where you're going to be stronger, or you may not need to watch a particular lecture because you have, that experience with that subject matter. But then there are other topics where you're more deficient. Okay, so those topics where you're not as strong, well, then I will do step one, because the course is set up. Quite honestly, as a U.S. instructor and doing this as long as I have, I realize an Indian candidate doesn't know U.S. business law, probably doesn't know U.S. tax law that well, may know, Indian GAAP, but they don't know U.S. GAAP and how we're treating an issue with pensions, or where we're putting interest paid on a statement of cash flow because of differences in rules. So we set up the course with that in mind. I don't presume, while we're called a review course, we don't presume prior knowledge. That you'd be surprised how at U.S. universities don't teach topics like, believe it or not, U.S. governmental accounting. So we as a review course take a very conservative approach to say, I am not going to presume prior knowledge. I'm not going to presume you had this at the university. I'm not going to presume you got an A. As a matter of fact, we're going to take the exact opposite position and say, hey, maybe this candidate has never seen this before. And if that's the case, we got you covered. But if it turns out that you're very strong in a topic, we have another path for you where you can go directly to the question. So you're not wasting your valuable study time rehashing things you're already confident about. So I love the customized approach that they have at UWorld and what your course does. And we treat everyone like an individual, because everyone is an individual, has a different story, a different path. So if you want to get it done, where there's a will, there's a way. We will make it happen with you. We need to get to know you, though. Tell us your strengths, your weaknesses, your concerns, and we'll work with that.
Okay, I think this brings us to a very important question that we're talking about. See, in India, and as content providers, we face this question a lot, because there have been some providers like Becker, who has been like a default go-to provider. The moment people think of CPA, the history of Becker has been so much that people think that even now, we need some kind of a convincing for people. Yeah, Pete, can you hear us?
Yes, I got you.
I think you just froze a couple of seconds there. So my question to you is, let's see, the way you were saying, even at Pixalearn, we kind of assume that people do not have a lot of, even if they're professionals, we assume that they're starting with a long gap. maybe they're coming back to studies after a long time, and we don't feel that there's one solution for everything. So one size fits all is not the dictum that we also assume, and that ways probably UWorld has been a very good fit for us. But one question that I want to ask you specifically is that you've been the face of Becker for so long, and now you are the person who's championing UWorld so much. So when you think about UWorld, what is the candidate that you have in your mind? Or when you think about, so I'll tell you my stories once I hear from you, but who is the ideal student who would, according to you, benefit a lot if that person signs up for UWorld? What would be your answer?
Well, I had a long history at Becker, and I made a conscious decision to move over to UWorld. First, I was teaching CFA for Wiley. So when UWorld acquired Wiley, I went over first on the CFA side. So I had an advantage that I got to see what the company was like, what their philosophy was like on the CFA side. And when I saw that, I said to myself, when my contract expires with Becker, I want to make the move to UWorld, because in today's world, the way the UWorld product is set up, this is going to help candidates who don't have that confidence, because Becker is such a large company and they got acquired by private equity. But I believe that everyone is an individual and should be treated as an individual, and that there has to be a customized approach, especially with the way this is expanded internationally, that again, everyone has a different background and a different story. So the UWorld approach is very interactive. We believe in the more senses you engage, the more likely it is you're going to retain that information, right? So having somebody read PowerPoints to you, in my opinion, is not very valuable. You need someone who, as you and I mentioned earlier when you first came on, even though we were virtual and you watched my lectures that way, you felt that it was very, interactive. And we believe if you really want to understand something, you need to put the pen to the paper and you need to write it. Now, I know this generation loves to type, but there's a lot of independent research that shows if you really want to transfer something from short-term to long-term memory and really have a better understanding of the concept, what you write, you will remember. I make the analogy, if you were to hire me to be your fitness trainer, if you were to go to the fitness center with me and watch me on a treadmill, that's not going to do much for your health, is it, right? You got to get on your own treadmill. And UWorld, because of their history working with medical doctors and law students and pharmacists and chartered financial analysts, they really understand high stakes exams with incredible volume of information. And I think one of the things that candidates struggle with all of these different concepts and these different exams is that when do I know enough about inventory? When have I worked enough questions in inventory that I can confidently move on to property, plant, equipment? When have I done enough questions in leases that I'm confident that I can move on now and study bonds, let's say, right? So the UWorld program, the Smart Path, utilizes technology where we're going to tell you, based upon every candidate who's been through the program, that, hey, you don't need to work every question in inventory. As a matter of fact, we're not impressed by volume of questions worked. My old Becker days, it was work every question in the software 3 times. And, that's a lot of questions to work. And that was very daunting. And that became a barrier because a lot of people, quite honestly, didn't have that time to work every single question in the software. And really, when you think about it, you would think there's a high correlation between volume of questions worked and passing. It's not true. Because if you're working every question, but you're not improving, if you're working questions, making mistakes, but not learning from your mistake, then what's the point in that volume of questions, right? So the UWorld approach is on a sliding scale. Let's use your time wisely. If you're stronger in a topic and you're getting more of those questions correct, you don't need to work the same volume. Conversely, if you're not doing as well, then you know what? The volume goes up. But at some point, we need to see that improvement. That's why our focus is on, hey, you know what? And candidates are also like, Pete, do I need to get 90% or 80% of pension questions correct to really know pensions well? When students study by themselves, they don't realize that a more difficult topic the percentage you need to get correct to be in the passing range is much lower than you would think. So with a difficult topic like a pensions, kids don't realize that 72% of the questions correct in a difficult topic might put you in the top 10% of the candidates on that exam. So this is the software is able to set these standards, these benchmarks, that if you're hitting these benchmarks in volume of questions and percent correct, 90+% of our candidates who put in that time on the volume of questions and the percent correct, they follow the program, they're going to pass that exam on the first attempt. And we don't lie to people and say, hey, you could do this in a week or a month or 2 months. No, slow and steady wins the race. We're very upfront and honest that, look, slow and steady, because they're testing higher level skills today, as we mentioned earlier. It's not just memorization, right? It's analysis, it's application, it's evaluation. A higher understanding takes more time than merely calculating the current ratio. You can memorize the formula in 5 minutes, but then to apply it and to be able to analyze it, that takes more time. So we, in our study plan, we're going to set up realistic goals, given your candidate, how much time do they have on average to study each day, each week, so that we could say, okay, testing on this date makes sense given the average hours you have available to study each day and every week. We want to make sure, step one, that the study plan is set up in a way that, number one, it's attainable, right? It's got to be a realistic, it can't be an ideal, right? Because we all have family, we have jobs, we have other things going on. So step one, make sure we're going to put together a study plan that can meet your individual needs, given how busy your life is. And then we also want to make sure, like, the average number of hours. People always want to know, Pete, to study for financial, what's the average number of hours? Well, I tell people it could be maybe 160 hours, maybe, right? But that could be 40 hours less if you're a recent university graduate and you had a lot of classes in US GAAP, or it could be a little bit more. But I tell people, boy, when you think about it, Bob, if you just give me 10 hours a week, 10 hours a week, 4 hours on a Saturday, 4 hours on a Sunday, and a couple of hours during the week, or however you want to break it up, just 10 hours a week, 40 hours a month, slow and steady, you could absolutely be thoroughly prepared for financial in a 4-month period of time. And they don't rush you like the old days. It used to be 18 months under the old rules to get and 18 months or 30 or 36 months is not to pass all 4. That's wrong. The first part you study for, you have as much time as you need. That 30 or 36 months is to finish the remaining 3 parts after you've passed your first part. That's why I say, you know what, we want to get your most challenging part out of the way first, so there's no time pressure, and then it gets relatively easier from there, right? So I think that customized approach with UWorld, the interactive approach, we encourage you to write it. Boy, we encourage you to speak it. I joke with people all the time, if you're dating someone and you really want to see, are you dating your soulmate? Talk to them on your next date. Talk to them about U.S. pension accounting. And if they're still there at the end of that date, they must really love you. Either that or they have serious psychological issues and you should run right now. But when you speak it, you write it, and you engage those senses, now you're more likely to remember it and, most importantly, understand it.
See, I'll add something here. I don't know about other countries, Shubir. I think you would be in a better position to comment. But in India, people who've already cleared CA and who are already working in that domain, they have an edge because they already know Ind AS, which is very similar to IFRS. And now they just have to level that up with US GAAP. What we've realized is a lot of students now who have, let's say, done MBA finance, or let's say who want to take this degree after completing their graduation. They now want CPA as a degree after their graduation. Now, these are the candidates who do not have a very strong background in accounting and technical knowledge, and neither do they have the relevant work experience. So when they study, they want to know the hows, the whys, the whats. They want to go in a little bit more detail because it's not possible to bring you up to that level where you can answer the sims properly without giving you that kind of a technical knowledge and the background. And that's where I feel UWorld has done a very, very good job. For all of those students who really want to do a little bit more of a depth analysis and understand the whys, why did this happen, and also the way your answers have been written. There are a lot of students who have come and who've told us that just by looking at the answers and the questions that they've attempted, they were in a position to memorize and also to attempt the sims on the basis of the MCQs. So the way the questions have been answered with each answer choice and the graphs and the charts, a lot of students have been able to relate to that, building up a knowledge which, as you said, right, we're not assuming any prior work, any prior knowledge. So that actually is helping students build up that confidence, who are ready to put in some extra hours probably to master the concept, but that confidence is slowly building up one at a time. So we are seeing that happen with a lot of students who want to do a little bit more depth study and they're ready to put in efforts. And yeah, of course, what you're saying, see, more than any other country with the situation now of dollar INR moving in, Indians are actually spending a lot in writing these papers. The other day we were analyzing and we realized that of the total around 4.75 lakhs, which is again today's date value, but it may go up as the rupee, depreciates further. So out of this, nearly 65% is just the cost of writing the paper. So in terms of INR, it comes out to around 78,000 to 80,000 Indian INR to write one paper. So we also, as a provider, we are very clear that we don't have to rush. Be completely prepared. Take one paper at a time, especially now with the centers opening up in India. There is a possibility that you guys can do it, right? So we take one paper at a time and we make sure that you're 100% prepared and you clear the paper in the first attempt itself. So we have a gap of 3 months where we take the session. 1 month is given as a gap for you to write the papers. And we have seen for the last 3.5 years that people are becoming that serious. We make sure that you have 3 weeks time to set up a strategy for yourself. And then we just boil down your 3 months to 1 week. You complete your deliverable for a week. It's very important that you write the paper when you're 100% ready. And I feel UWorld is doing a very good job as far as that is concerned, because students are getting that confidence that, yes, I'm writing to clear the paper. We are not writing to try and clear the paper. That gap we are seeing now happening when it comes to students writing their CPA papers in India. So for all of those deep learners, and the exam, the answers have been written in such an easy, understandable format that it is showing results. So what you're saying, we are actually seeing that happening on the ground level as well. So yeah. Yeah, one thing I want to ask you is, like, again, a lot of our students ask us this question, which is, once we clear CPA, apart from just the increase in salary or the paycheck that goes up, does this degree actually help us have a seat in the boardroom? What is your say in it, Peter? Like, do you actually feel that with this degree we can think of that kind of an advancement in career?
I do, and not only do I think it, I know it. I've seen it in 25 plus years of doing this. I'm shocked when I travel, and I have former students who are CFOs of companies, COOs, partners at the big four major firms, and to see how their career has progressed. And they all say that it's amazing. The theme is almost always the same, that that you've been talking so much about confidence. You would look at these very successful people today in the boardroom and immediately assume that they always knew that this would happen for them, right? But that's quite honestly not the case. As you talk to these folks, many of them were insecure and weren't sure, hey, can I do this? Do I have the ability? Do I have the time? And so many of them reflect upon their days when they took that leap of faith and said, I'm going to believe in myself, and I'm going to believe that I can do this, and that I'm going to find a way to get it done and find a path that works for me. And then lo and behold, now I don't know if I'll still be around in 25 years to see your students' success stories 25 years from now, although Shabir, I'm 30, so I should be around at 55. But yeah, I've just seen it for decades, and I'm sure Shabir and I'm sure Professor, you've seen it as well. It's amazing to see that happen. So yes, I have seen it literally hundreds, if not thousands of times.
when we talk to students who've cleared CPA, one thing that they keep telling us is how after this degree, maybe they have a lot of knowledge even before that. But after this degree, this brings a separate level of confidence altogether when you're in front of the board and you're putting in the thing, because it brings that credibility. You without that certification and you with that certification speaking, there's a force of authority that you have beside your name, and that reflects even in the candidates, apart from the work ex that they had brought earlier. So the three letters actually does make you confident also when you are in the board. So we have seen that. Yeah.
Well, no, I have to say too, in U.S. corporate governance under U.S. securities law, for companies that are publicly traded, that board of directors is required to have at least one person on that board who is intimately familiar with the accounting standards, and thus requires the CPA. Now, I don't know that I've seen anything comparable that you have to have a chartered financial analyst. No, that's not required, or somebody who's a lawyer or something. But that CPA, you need, it is a requirement, somebody on that board who has that level of understanding of the accounting rules and regulations. And as you know, with multinational companies, it's not just US GAAP again, it's having that advantage of, yes, I understand US GAAP, but I also understand IFRS and how they're similar and how they're different, etc. So really, it does give you a significant advantage, because that board membership, somebody has to have that knowledge, and that CPA fills that role for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense also, frankly, because when you work so hard, especially if you're a working professional and it takes you around 14 months to clear a degree like this, it is a huge benefit for you to know that, yes, we have something much bigger in our store coming up, so that is a very big motivation. Pete, I'm going to just change my stand a little bit and talking about the motivation that's required for students who are in this degree. So, we have seen that the biggest problem is not the technical ability. I think if you put in enough effort, I don't think there's anything in the world that somebody cannot do. But let's say you are sitting in Bombay or Bangalore or some other city, you've been completely drained out after you've worked the entire day, and then you have to push yourself to study. To that candidate, how would you say what should be the motivation? Or to that candidate, what would you say should be the initial thought in his or her mind before that person motivates to do this? I still remember what he said in those lectures, but yeah.
Even before Pete speak, I'll just tell the candidate, watch one of Pete's videos and he'll be highly motivated to do this.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think those are the words that still echo in my ears now when I'm trading. But yeah, I would want, because see, I think that is the biggest challenge with these degrees, not just the technical skills, but the resilience to go through, one paper at a time, every day to, work for that particular time, that consistency, which is very important. How do you suggest students build up that consistency?
Well, to understand that part of what the exam is testing, although not explicitly, is that ability to have that discipline, right? To be able to persevere through these challenges. Because the good news is, if you aspire to sit on somebody's board or to have a C-suite position, there's a lot of challenges that you face on a daily basis, right? So as a student and as a candidate, the challenge you face is to make the time to put in to accomplish that day's objective, right? I will say, though, it's funny you said at the end of the day. I generally try to encourage my students to get up an hour earlier than they normally would, and I'll tell you why. If you wait to the end of the day to begin to study, it's on your mind all day. It's like you've been thinking about it all day. It kind of puts a damper on your day. And then you're like, it makes it a tough day. But when you get up an hour earlier and get it done first thing before you've done anything else, you already start your day feeling accomplished. You go to work knowing I don't have to do anything after work today because I got up an hour earlier today and I made it a priority to get it out of the way first thing in the morning. Now, that works for some candidates. For other candidates, for whatever reason, if they have a family, children, that may not be practical. You may have to do it at the end of the day. I challenge people to see beyond, as we've been discussing, the money and opportunity, but what I eventually learned, especially you know, I said, how does somebody on a Wall Street determine whether or not a stock is in fact a buy, a sell, or a hold? Is it undervalued or overvalued? Like, I can't tell you how important our accounting knowledge is of the financial statements, that if you want to go on to be a CFA charter holder, you can't be in that position to be successful unless you understand the financial statements. I challenge people to say, think of why this is so important. Like, what is the reason behind? I see the income statement. Why I see the balance sheet? Why do I need the statement of cash flow? I can see cash change from last year's amount to this year's amount. Well, what is it that excuse me, the statement of cash flow, what is that going to provide me that I can't already see on the balance sheet? You challenge yourself to say, you know what? There's a lot of value in this knowledge. Like, when you understand that somebody's net income might be rising. And if you look at some of the large US companies in the past 2 decades that have gone bankrupt, WT Grant, Enron, others, where their income was growing, yet their operating cash flow was not growing at the same level as that accrual basis net income. Like, I tell students, is cash going up a good sign? Maybe, if you're earning it. But when I was in law school, I was unemployed. I was going to school full time, and I was borrowing the money. But if you looked at my bank statement, you would say, wow, Pete's doing great. Look at all this money coming in. No, I wasn't earning it. I was borrowing it. And on the flip side, if you got fired from your job tomorrow, how would you pay your rent? How would you buy your groceries? How would you do that? Well, you would have to start liquidating assets. You might have to sell your stocks, your bonds, whatever it is. Now, cash is coming in, but that's actually an early warning red flag of financial distress, because you don't have a job. How many assets do you have available to sell? So I challenge people to say, why is this important? How would someone on Wall Street who's trying to value this company, why are they looking at the income statement? What does that tell me? When you look at a balance sheet, does that tell you the market value of a company? No, it doesn't, because most assets are not on the books at fair market value. So the purpose of that balance sheet is to determine what? Risk of financial distress. Do they have sufficient assets to pay their obligations when they become due? How are they raising capital? Like, there's legal signals. You can't trade on material, non-public information, as we all know. But there are signals, like, if you look at that statement of cash flow, that cash flow from financing, there are signals you can pick up. Like, if you acquire another company, how would you pay for that? Would you pay cash? Would you borrow money to buy that other company? Or would you issue your stock for their stock? And I tell people, think about what management might be thinking about that scenario, because if you're pessimistic, I'm not letting you walk away with my cash. No. I'll make you my partner. I'll give you my stock for your stock, because then if you gave me false information to entice me to buy your business, well, if I go down, you're going down with me. It's interesting. So I challenge people to think about how this information can be valuable for you as an individual investor. You're saving for your future. You want to buy stocks and bonds like everybody else. How can this accounting knowledge and this knowledge of financial statements help you better determine what's a proper security for you to hold in your portfolio, what you might want to buy, what you might want to sell? These people in Wall Street are no smarter than us. Let me tell you something. They struggle with the accounting. If you can understand this information, you can benefit from this personally beyond all the job opportunities, right? It'll help you make better investment decisions for your future, your children's future. So that's what I challenge people to do. It's interesting. It really is. If you set aside all the other opportunity, it's interesting information many times.
Peter, I'll just share a story. There was a student who joined us. He was from one of the IIMs in India, and he has been in the business of, dealing with companies, acquisitions, and all of that. And I was so surprised that he took such a lot of interest in the financial statements. A lot of time when people take these decisions of, big time investments and buying, maybe they do not have that much of understanding in depth of the financials. So I was a little taken aback, we just assume, right, that if you're doing this day in and day out, then this should be at the back of your hand. But no, I think there are some areas where technical knowledge and that theoretical understanding is as important as the practical understanding. So, yeah, there are a lot of people now who are realizing the importance of getting into that technical knowledge, not just the work-ex that we're talking about. Yeah.
And you know what? And another thing I didn't mention earlier about the evolution of the CPA exam, the choice of a discipline. Like you can see what I'm passionate about, right? Asset valuation, financial statement analysis. That's on a discipline called bar. You know, so I happen to like that. So that would be the discipline I'd sit for. There are people who are every bit as passionate about, especially in India, information technology, security of that information, like US companies divulging all this information about their clients to all their employees or contractors in India. How do we safeguard that information? So you might find information systems and compliance, that's your passion. Or you might say, no, Pete, I really like tax. I want to avoid tax. I like planning. Well, then TCP. So I really love that 3 parts. Yeah, we all have to take that basic knowledge, but one of those 4 parts, boy, that's where you really get to take advantage of what you personally are passionate about. So that's another incentive because you're more interested, you'll be more engaged.
But I want to mention something here, Pete. You know, last one and a half, like 2 years now since we've seen the discipline, I'm heartbroken, yeah, because what is happening, you know, bar takes a lot of time, and unfortunately, people now who are qualifying as CPA, they're gravitating towards TCP for the simple reason that the pass scores are very high. So what is happening
Correct.
now, unfortunately, is, and I find it so difficult to explain it to people, that your knowledge of US GAAP is incomplete if you are not going in for tax and if you've not done bar. Actually, it's a very dangerous situation because you are not learning so much about US GAAP if you've left bar. And the entire idea of costing and management and economics, which is in case if you're not taking auditing or finance, like in general, it's awesome because then you don't have to do it. But if you are doing that and if you're taking TCP, because that is what is happening now, people are gravitating towards ISC and TCP more because of the sheer volume and the pass rates that is happening with bar. So
and that is an important
is great. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
the content is great, the intent is great, but the problem is it's very, because that long-term perspective. So for a long time, I used to tell the students that it depends on what you want to do. But now, as a mentor, as a trainer, I have to leave it to them. You know, I cannot tell them because bar is actually a very important paper, but at the same time, the pass rates don't reflect. So now the students have, yeah, you know, now the students have, we have to first get a degree. And unfortunately, all of these students are having a huge, you know, a gap in their knowledge base if you've not done bar, you know. So unfortunately, I feel probably another year and they would kind of level, they should level it, because otherwise the whole purpose gets defeated. But yeah,
correct. And the AICPA hears us loud and clear that the differential in those pass rates needs to converge so that people are making a choice based upon career path rather than what has the highest pass rate, because the same thing exists in the US. I have so many folks who are going into audit, so you would think naturally they would want to sit for ISC or bar. But even though they're not going to do tax for a living, they're sitting for TCP because the pass rate is so much higher. And look, sometimes, again, it's very customized, individualized. If the truth is I need to get this done as soon as possible and I'm really not passionate about, I just want the one with the highest pass rate, then you're giving your students great advice, right? But at some point, the AICPA has said they're going to try to have these pass rates converge so that we're making choices based, more importantly, long-term vision and education and career, as opposed to which one just has the higher pass rate. But that is certainly a good point, and I'm glad you bring that to the attention of your candidates, because that is one of the factors they need to consider when choosing a discipline.
Yeah, and frankly speaking, that is something that I've done last year. Kept on saying that you tell me what you want to do, but now it's something that we've left it to the students because you can't push them enough, right? So I think by the end of this year, we would be in a more better position to give them advices correctly. One thing I want to know from you is, you have seen so many students now over the last so many years. Do you find anything? I mean, I don't know now if you've had a first-hand experience with the Indian students per se, but We have a lot of data to second, but I would want to know from you, do you think that Indians as contenders for US CPA have something which is unique to their approach to CPA? I mean, have you felt it during your career as a mentor?
I
Anything
do.
in
I think that especially those who understand IFRS and the differences in US GAAP, like we could actually have a very good dialogue about, why isn't there one set of standards around the world? How come that convergence of standards, we were going to have one set of standards around the world? Why didn't that happen? And it's interesting, like different perspectives. Like, so if, for example, in the US, we don't mark a lot of assets to market value. We certainly understand that market value is more relevant. And if it's publicly traded and there's a market for that asset, sure, that's a reliable estimate of value, right? However, if it's not publicly traded, a lot of your property, plant, equipment certainly is not, intangibles are not. It's very difficult to mark that to market value. So market value is certainly more relevant, but historical cost is more reliable. I love the Indian student because they have that perspective on differences and the logic behind it so that you could better understand it. Like, so I'll have Indian students say, Pete, how come in the US interest expense, if you're not a bank, for example, is emphasized as a non-operating expense? It's not. If you're not a bank, it's not an operating expense. It's a return to a supplier of capital, much like a dividend. So in the US, we have this contradiction. On the income statement, interest is not an operating expense, yet on the statement of cash flow, interest paid, we make that an operating outflow. And whereas around the world, they say, well, why? Shouldn't that be financing like a dividend? And we could have this discussion because the US student is so robotic, that's all they know. They don't have a basis of comparison. Whereas the average Indian student, I could have a dialogue and they will say, well, and then I could explain and say, well, in the US, although interest is not an operating expense, on the statement of cash flow, the reason we make it operating outflow is because it's legally required. It puts you at risk of financial distress. It's not like a dividend because it's not declared at the discretion of the board, So the Indian student, I find, that has that background in IFRS or different accounting systems, they can understand that. They can see the logic behind a lot of this and why sometimes the rules are different. So I find it very difficult to have that discussion with the average US candidate because they don't have that global perspective that the average Indian candidate that I see many times has that. And it's great because it stimulates the conversation, the discussion, the lecture, and it makes it easier to recall the information because you understand the logic behind that. So, and also I find that the Indian students, quite honestly, it's life altering. Like in the US, there's different opportunities, obviously, versus what the opportunities in India, and that the ability to get those three letters in India is truly life altering, and that motivation I see with that average Indian candidate is so impressive. When they want to get this done and the effort they're willing to put in, it's admirable. It's commendable, and that's why the U.S. is sending so much work to India because of that work ethic and that global perspective. Now, and I certainly understand why the U.S. companies are taking advantage of that as a valuable resource, to help with, tax, audit, consulting, whatever it may be.
I'll just share a very small story with you. We had a student once in our live class, and when he was doing US tax, he actually started with Indian tax. He made a huge worksheet of what is the difference. And there was a time when I had to tell him that you'll have to start US tax from zero. Because, like that, you're completely messed up in your brain. And then we reached a stage when he started US tax from zero. And eventually, we had a discussion of how the mentality of somebody in India and somebody in US. So there's a huge change in the thought process that gets reflected. And by the time you complete, let's say you start with FAR, you start understanding a little bit of US psychology. Then you go to audit. By the time you go to reg, you are kind of half there. But by the time you complete the entire course, we clearly start understanding the logic behind what's different between the way we think and the way US thinks. And that clarity comes in.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that because that brings it to understanding. And it's interesting. The discussion I could have with the U.S. students is why is GAAP different than the tax law? Why don't we all just report revenue at the same time, tax or financials? Why don't we report expenses at the same time? And it's interesting. And then eventually, it dawns on you to say, well, there's a different agenda, right? We want to show our investors we're rich and we make a lot of money. Give us more of your money, buy our stock. But then we want to show the government, no, we're poor. We don't have any profit. Don't take any of our money because we are not making much. So I love those discussions. And quite honestly, I think your approach is outstanding because when you do those comparisons, it brings this information to life. It makes it something exciting to learn.
And one more thing now, the way US is now changing the examination pattern, it's not enough to talk about these concepts in silos. They're now testing, the sims are now testing end to end, and probably it's not just end to end. The synergies between the topics are also getting tested now more often than what it was happening prior to 2024. So unless and until you connect the dots and then you connect the topics together, like FAR, a lot of synergies between FAR and audit now. So this approach is required because if you don't get this approach, you see it directly correlating into the marks that you're going to get it in your exam as well.
Brilliant,
right?
brilliant. Great advice because that's another reason why I say to start with financial because it'll make your audit study so much easier if you have that understanding of financial. So that's why the order, look, people either get no advice or poor advice. That's why your company is so successful and why we're doing what we're doing at UWorld with that customized approach. Because quite honestly, these things that you would think, should be so normal are not. And that advice is invaluable. So credit to you for giving that type of advice to your students because that is so incredibly helpful in their journey.
Thank you so much, Pete. Okay, a couple of questions before we start the questions from the students. One thing is, again, a lot of students ask us this question that now with AI coming in 2030, a lot of this work is going to get automated. Elon Musk has gone public saying that work will become optional. So in all of that, where is CPA and how is it still going to be relevant? Like if we put in that time, effort, energy, resource, we want to make it future ready. So how is this AI going to impact and make US CPA relevant in the time? Let's not talk about 2040, 50. Let's talk about 2030. What is your take on it?
Yeah, I think that reasonable minds can disagree. So I would say that AI, like I said, has a place in certain, certainly accumulating data, crunching the numbers, right, where we would have to memorize and can quickly and many times efficiently do that type of work. But the analysis, the judgment, that's a whole nother story. And AI still being susceptible to hallucinating. We have US with his regular articles in the law journals here in the US where lawyers are relying upon AI to make an argument and providing case law that doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
The AI hallucinates, So look, I think that the human element, that judgment, that experience, that analysis, that evaluation is still going to be done at the highest levels by individuals, and that someone needs to manage what is being provided by what I would say back in the day were the interns who accumulated all this information, and then we ultimately had to decipher it. I still see that higher level, of management, is going to require that individual, right? And we have to put a lot of skills together to manage people and manage the business and all that goes into, people don't realize that, to move up within public accounting, ironically, it's generally not your technical accounting skills. It's not the AI skills. It's your ability to sell, to bring in new business, to add value to a client by, suggesting other services that client might benefit from. So, I don't claim to be the AI expert, but I'm very skeptical right now that it can replace that human element where this type of interaction is required to really succeed and do well in the business world, because it's also about human relationships. And I don't see that AI or a robot is going to be able to do that. I don't think a robot's going to be able to say there's nobody better than us, like the way I can say there's nobody better than us. So I'm pretty confident that, yeah, the skill set is so diverse, and it's not just about accumulating data and crunching numbers, that, again, that higher level of evaluation and analysis still requires that individual.
Okay. Pete, a lot of these students, and I think this was a question that we took up in the last webinar also, Shubhi, but there are so many students who are not from the accounting background, who are now gravitating towards USCPA. Maybe somebody from the law background in India, maybe somebody who's BTech student who's never done accounting in any of the prior times, or maybe somebody who's done journalism. So for all of those candidates, what is your take? Shall we encourage them? Do you think it's doable for them right now to have such a huge shift in their career?
Yeah, I do, because I like I said, that customized approach, it's not one size fits all. So, somebody with a university degree in accounting may only require X number of hours to review something because it's a review. But for a lot of these candidates, it's not a review. They'll be learning it for the first time with us, and that's okay. We expect that. We understand that. And I have that experience from teaching the CFA. So being a chartered financial analyst, many times I'll have engineers or I'll have scientists. I have people that have, you can't teach the business person sometimes the science, but you could take the scientist and teach them those business skills so that they can leverage their scientific knowledge in that industry, right? So I'm accustomed to that. I know you're accustomed to that. UWorld understands that because of the different products that we have. We know that candidates come from a variety of different backgrounds, and that's why all of our programs are set up to be flexible and customizable, and that's why we take the time to learn about that individual, because I want to know if you're coming from a different background, you have a totally different study plan than somebody who just graduated from university and has a degree in accounting. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just that you can't do it doing that person's approach. You need your own unique approach, and you need an expert like yourself who can sit down with that candidate, understand their needs and circumstances, and customize a study plan so that they can be successful as well.
Okay, so that's the good news for most of the candidates here and we are seeing that now in our institute, that there are students who've just taken law, and before that they did economics, and now they are clearing and they're getting that confidence, one paper at a time. They've cleared 2 papers, the 3rd paper, and by the time they complete the last paper, they would be a more mature version of what they were before they signed up, because this is like a huge shift for them, right?
And if you're coming from a legal background, that knowledge will pay dividends in regulation, because we test the business law and know it's U.S. business law. You still understand a lot of the concepts in contract law or bankruptcy law or corporate law, and why you would have different types of entities. People always want to know, I want to start a business. Should I be a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLP, an LLC? So you could take that knowledge from, really that industry or that education, and somewhere on the CPA exam, I'm going to venture to guess that industry issue or that topic will be somewhere, and you could leverage that.
Okay, I think this is the last question, and then we just open the forum for the question for the students in general. If I were to ask you to summarize or to just use one phrase to describe power of USCPA, what would that be for you?
One phrase. Gosh, I could boil it down into one word: opportunity. I think that relatively young professionals, you want opportunity, because you don't know what you like until you have an opportunity to do it and try it. But unless you get the opportunity, how do you know what you're really passionate about? And that's why I'm a big advocate of starting your career or changing careers into a public accounting setting where you can get exposure to different industries, different disciplines, different companies, so you could see what you're really passionate about. But I think above and beyond anything, the opportunity that those letters provide is life-altering.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll just take a short poll, and then we'll open the forum for the students to put questions to you. Okay, I already see a couple of questions pouring in. I'll simply just take a very short poll, guys. would you mind just casting a poll for us? Very simple questions. And we just want to see how has been your experience by joining us for this particular forum. And we would just open the forum for certain questions from the student side. Are you guys able to see the polls?
I could see it.
Okay, thank you. You needn't cast though.
I can't vote. I want to vote. Shabir, you vote. Vote for me. Vote for me.
I really don't understand how do you bring that energy, Pete?
I love what I do. I'm the luckiest man on the planet. It's easy when you love what you do, and that would be the one thing that I would wish for all of your candidates, that they find something they're passionate about, because then you wake up every day and you're excited about that day. So yeah, that's what I would wish for everyone. I'm a very lucky man. Isn't that right, Shabir?
Absolutely. We're lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I'll just share a couple of stories till the time they're casting their polls. There was a student who joined us and she was nearing 50 years. She was running a very good practice in India. And the day when she cleared CPA, we had taken a podcast with her where we talked about her journey. And she immediately opened up offices in Dubai and other places, because the reason why she wanted to do is, but she wanted to start practicing, taking in work from the US and then getting it done here. The day when that story was released, I had so many students call me up who were in their late 40s and early 50s, and they really got inspired. They started talking about if she could do it, probably this. And actually some of them signed up because they wanted to, maybe they had taken this up, left it for some time. I had people calling me from US talking about how there is a huge recession happening there and they are very scared of whether they would be having their jobs in the US or not. But that one story resonated with so many people in that age bracket, because they realized that it is something which is doable. If one person could do it, there could be others as well. In fact, now there are so many other students who are now planning this as a second innings. They are nearing their retirement and now they are signing up for the CPA course, thinking that they would start something on their own with their colleagues in India. And that number is increasing. I don't know if you face the same in the US or not, but what is your experience on it?
Yeah, a lot of times folks who managed or majored in management or marketing or finance, and after working for 10, sometimes 20 years, they find that they want to make a change, and they look to that CPA and that path because they want to leverage their historical experience, but then also want these to combine it with these technical skills so that they can have all the opportunity again that we've mentioned. I think there's just so many people who don't realize that we're not bookkeepers, that a certified public accountant, granted, that's the first step in the learning process, but we're not doing debits and credits all day. That when you really see, all the knowledge and opportunity and people, but sometimes they have to learn that the hard way, and they see that from being in the workforce, and then they realize, boy, I want to make that switch. So the other thing is it's recession proof, because I tell people these publicly traded companies, whether the economy is doing well or not, they need to have their audit done. Whether their economy is doing well or not, they need to do their taxes. So the accounting profession, many times people turn to it out of heartache because they've lost their job that might have been dependent upon the economy being in an upturn. So it's a very defensive type credential because it's recession proof.
And one question I have for you, Shubir, we have recently opened centers in Philippines, right? And when we read a lot of these articles, we realize that a lot of this work is flowing in from US. The number of GCCs that have popped up in India after COVID is tremendous. In fact, there are now talks of people like you and me who are planning to open up GCCs in India. What do you think that, when people talk about this demand and supply gap happening and the centers opening up, what do you think that there is a demand for this degree building up in a lot more places just like India, or do you think that this gap is something which is temporary and probably do you think that structural shift happening where more work would be done by a lot of these work would be flowing to countries like India, Philippines, or all of these places? What is your take on it?
I think absolutely, and especially look at the tighter, visa rules in the US as well. I think
Yeah.
even more outsourcing is actually going to happen right now. The Philippines is very hungry, just like India. The learners there. So, and it's a big, outsourcing center, but not at the scale of, I think, the opportunities in India that are going to exist for sure. Um,
Hmm.
we see even places like Japan, because JCPA has there's about 1,300 JCPAs that qualify every year. So again, the US CPA being in very high demand in that country as well. So um, from our analysis, speaking to recruiters, we don't see this dying down anytime soon. I think for the next 5 years, there's just going to be tremendous exploding growth, and then sort of depends, especially CPAs that have a US CPA and an experience in AI or something like that. I think they're going to be even in more demand. So um, we don't see this stopping anytime soon. And where they're talking about that gap between the dearth in accounting
Yeah.
professionals, and that's real. That's just not something that's just thrown out there. So
Okay.
we see more and more work going to be outsourced to India.
And one more question that students keep asking us is, when I'm thinking of doing an international degree, let's say I'm from India and I'm planning to take an international degree, then do you think that this degree would be helpful for me if I want to take in clients from Europe or maybe Saudi or Southeast Asia? Do you think it has that versatility that, not only US, but other countries would also be accepting you as a candidate par with the international credential? What is your take on that?
Absolutely, it gives you mobility, right? So
Yeah.
you could have a local qualification, but it might not translate outside that particular country. But a US CPA, whether you're from the US or whether you do it from India, those three letters behind your name gives you that global mobility, that recognition that you have that body of knowledge. If in that country they're working with US clients and they need people to sign off on audits, well, you do that. And if it's a multinational company that has offices in your home country, again, you're very marketable because you have both of them. Um, so absolutely, it's just like someone saying you could have an MBA from anywhere in the world, but how's it recognized? But that's where professional qualifications come in, just like the US CPA, because whether you're looking at anyone from anywhere in the world, you have that same body of knowledge, which is fantastic.
Okay. Thank you so much. Huh? I'll just take some of the questions that are flowing in. Shweta Sanath. Shweta has a question where she's asking us, uh, is it advisable for a mid-career move to choose CPA or an EA? A career in marketing will be disregarded entirely and we shall be treated at par with freshers. So typically, she's talking about a mid-career move, maybe from a place where it's non-finance, and now let's say she's used the word of marketing, and she's saying now if she's starting to move to other finance-oriented degree like a CPA or an EA, will she be treated as a fresher, or her earlier experience would also have some role to play? What do you say? So
Is
see,
that for me?
yeah, I mean, whoever takes it. Yeah, so this is a question that a lot of people ask. We already have some money coming in. Now, if we change our degree or we change our entire career path, will I be treated as a fresher? Is it worth?
Well, it depends upon the firm, but my experience has been with more mature new hires that you move up far more quickly than
Hmm.
somebody without your prior work experience. So I do think there are certain skills that you have to learn on the job, and there's certain training that's required. But I think the time you spend at those various positions you're not going to spend as much time. You will move up generally. You
Hmm.
tend to move up faster than somebody who doesn't have that prior work experience. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, so it takes a couple of years probably to get settled there, but it's not that you'll be treated completely as a fresher because all of that prior knowledge would play a role once you start performing. Yeah.
Correct.
Here we have somebody called Shumanto, and his question is, what should be the sequence of exams if he chooses TCP as a discipline subject?
So my recommendation would be, if tax is your passion, as we mentioned earlier, I would do financial first because it's a very academic exam. Takes generally the longest to study for. So tax or audit, I suggest studying financial first. Then for the reasons we mentioned earlier, because of the overlap in content, I would do an audit right after the financial. And then you sit for the core, the reg, which has both tax and business law, which is kind of like the, intermediate level of tax. But then the advanced level, the TCP, I would then sit for last because you could leverage the knowledge you've gained in reg. And then obviously the TCP will then take you to the next level because it's not just the compliance. Now it's a little bit more the advanced skills of being able to help a client plan to lawfully avoid the taxes. So I would do FAR, audit, reg, TCP.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, that is how we are also structuring it at our place. We either start with reg, follow it up with TCP. So a lot of students who are not from the technical background, or maybe everybody comes at the same pace. There are a lot of people who want to start with reg, follow it up with TCP, then do FAR and end up with audit. Or maybe it is the other way around. Start with FAR, take audit, then take reg, follow it up with TCP.
Yeah, and again, these are rules of thumb. That's why I'm hesitant sometimes because, again, everything we do at UWorld, and I know you do with all your students, is customize it. Because there are candidates who, the hardest step is the first step. So sometimes the part of the exam they're most passionate about or most confident in, for some candidates that's a better order because then once they get in the process of studying, then you know what, they're ready to move on. And like you say, the FAR they'll take on. So there's no one way of doing it. Everything can be, again, customized based upon that. And time has a lot to do with it as well. When you're busy or at work, that's probably not a good time to try to study for financial, right? So, sometimes you want to order the parts based upon where you have more time. Well, that's probably a good time to study for financial. If you have experience in audit or tax, then maybe those are parts you want to gravitate towards when you don't have quite as much time, right? So that's why there's a multitude of factors we need to learn from each individual candidate to customize a plan.
Meher here has a question. She's saying she's an Indian student being on budget, and if CPA is regarded as an investment, then it's a huge investment for most Indian students. In that case, if she starts working in a big four, or what is the duration within which you think that the person can get a return on the investment? So if you're taking or viewing the money that you're putting on CPA as an investment, what is the time period do you think they can think of an earn back on that investment that they're making?
Well, I don't know how different it is from a U.S. candidate. So in the U.S., there are, the 4 years or sometimes 5 years that you have to invest to get the education to be CPA eligible. So I'm more familiar with from the U.S. perspective. I'll defer to you and Shabir on the Indian perspective. But overall, it's a lifetime of not that it takes your lifetime to earn that back, but you've got to take, in my opinion, if you're too short-sighted, you don't make the best decisions about a lot of things in life, right? So it's not going to be a 1-year payback period, that's for sure. It's going to be, in the US, it could be, financially to recoup the cost of the university and everything that, it could be a 5 to 10 year, overall to break even financially, given the cost of getting the US degree. So it could take quite some time. But overall, when you look at the earning curve, right, it's more of a J, right? The J curve, because initially, obviously, you got the outflow, then you start to break even, and then you've got the big spike in earnings and opportunity. But for the specific Indian candidate, I would defer to you and Shabir.
I mean, Shradha, typically, US CPA versus a non-US CPA, there's about a 25 to 40% uptake on having it. So I think, the particular student that's asking the question, could calculate it on those terms.
Yeah, and in fact, what we have seen is like, unlike US, the way we generally try to put it is it's more than the money. It's also about the time as the biggest resource. The kind of effort that you're going to put today, with every passing year, that effort has to go up. If you're not married, you'll get married. If you don't have kids, you'll have kids. If you've not been promoted, you'll get promoted, right? So I feel more than just the cost involved, it is also the factor that the time that you have today, you're never going to get back again. And that's the reason it's very important that you take that as an investment, not only because, see, even if you're working, you will earn that money. And if I don't take the cost of college, because that's generally not what people include in the cost of CPA in India, at least, they take their graduation, and after that, they calculate the investment that goes into CPA. The return is anywhere between 1.5 to 2 years. I mean, in fact, even less than that. There have been students who've got promoted just after getting their degree. So don't take it just as an investment in terms of money. It is the biggest investment is your time, because this time you're never going to get back. That's what we keep saying, all our students. This time you'll never get back again in your life. It's going to get harder and harder with each.
Yeah,
And,
Yeah.
we're
and
just looking at the incremental cost. If we take out of
Yes.
the equation the university cost and just look at the cost of investing the
Yeah.
time and money to getting the CPA, it is a very quick turnaround. And then the opportunity beyond that, as Shabir said, when you look at 20 to 40%, that's not a one-time differential. I mean, that's a differential each and every year for the rest of your career. So when you look at it in those terms, the IRR is well above that cost of capital. So it's a no-brainer. The barrier shouldn't be, because it's going to be a quick turnaround. It's, are you willing to make the sacrifice in your and invest in yourself to take this step back for 12 months that you are going to have to put into study and learn, and then the financial investment. But then, are you kidding me? After that, like I said, that J curve, do a little research on the J curve, boy. You'll see it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think we've answered this question, Manya, for you. But just to reiterate her question is, and I think this is the last question for the day. Her question is, for young professional in an Indian Big Four firm, how much faster is the promotion ladder for someone with the US CPA compared to those without it?
You can't get promoted. It's not even a speed issue. It's a hard stop. If you cannot get promoted to manager without that CPA, generally. Maybe they would make an exception on the tax side. Sometimes they might, but it's rare. So it's a hard stop. So if you're looking to, go up the ladder in public accounting, that is a barrier to entry. So you need to get that CPA.
In fact, there are a lot of big fours in India who have kind of publicized it, that if you're not having a license, we are not going to promote you. And in fact, the moment you get that degree, that promotion comes in. Even with 2 papers, we have seen the promotion coming in. So that is a reality. That is not something which is all spoken in hush-hush voice. It is a reality.
Yeah, and also the candidate before asked about the finances and the financial return. Talk to folks who work at the public accounting firms in India and ask them about the incremental income, that jump in income when they go from uncertified to certified. And when they're eligible to be promoted to manager, there's that step up in income that you would not have that opportunity for unless you're a CPA. So again, there's no question the value add. You don't have to listen to us. Talk to folks in the industry, your friends, your colleagues who work in public accounting, and they will tell you. So do your due diligence, get that independent, objective commentary from them, and you will see the financial benefit is there for you.
I think with this, we come to the end of our session today. Thank you so much, Pete, for joining us. Thank you, Shabir, for making all of this happen. I think it was a wonderful experience for all of us. And I do look forward to having more of such sessions in future. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Great meeting you all. Best of luck.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.